morning, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Yellow Monster Rides. Today I'm going to go over a subject that I really haven't covered yet on the channel. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you my top 5 reasons why I think the Royal Enfield Classic 350 is a really good choice for either a beginner motorcyclist or somebody who's just looking for their first bike. Now, obviously this is going to appeal to people that are looking for sort of a retro bike or a modern classic, that kind of niche in the market, as opposed to something, you know, like a newer style bike. And anyway, let's go ahead and get into it. Number one is the cost. You can find a new or used Royal Enfield Classic 350 anywhere from, in the United States, from about $3,000 on up, you know, to if you buy it new at a dealer, could cost in the upwards of like $6,000. I've actually seen a few people try to sell their used Royal Enfield Classic 350s for what they paid the dealer MSRP and the dealer fees, and I just kind of laughed at those. I actually got a pretty good deal on this one. I didn't steal it, but I definitely walked away spending far, far less than I would have here in Arizona at one of the local dealers for a new one. And it only had right around 1,200 miles on it at the time. So it's not going to break the bank to get into one of these bikes as far as the entry level cost. Also, being a 350cc motorcycle, the insurance companies look at this, it's a very inexpensive motorcycle to insure. So the costs there are very low. Your aftermarket parts or genuine Royal Enfield accessories, they're not very expensive either. You're not going to pay the types of prices for parts and maintenance goods, like oil filters, you know, like just general tune-up stuff, that you would for a premium bike. And by premium, I don't necessarily mean a better bike, I just mean more expensive. Now, granted, there are places where, you know, people can point out where, because this is a more budget bike, you know, things aren't quite as nice as you would find on, say, like a not 25, more like a $12,000 Triumph. But we'll go through parts of those here in either this episode or another episode. But the entry cost, purchasing the bike, not going to break the bank. You're going to pay probably $5,000 or less. Your maintenance costs are going to be low, especially since this is such a simple bike to work on. I encourage you to purchase the, not only work off the owner's manual, but purchase the service manual. Look up all the videos on YouTube as far as to do your own maintenance. Very, very simple bike to work on. Air cooled, single cylinder. There's only 2 valves to adjust. Your oil changes are very simple. Changing the air filter, very simple. This is going to be a low cost bike to purchase, insure, and maintain. Now, reason number 2, I think that this is a good bike for beginners or for your first motorcycle, is actually what a lot of people kind of look at as a downside, but I think of it as an upside. It's not a particularly powerful bike. Now, I do think that it performs a little bit better than it looks on paper. It is rated at the crank for 20 brake horsepower. Actually, I don't think that those words don't all quite go together. At the crank, it's 20, I think it's 20.2 or something like that horsepower. Now, I've actually dynoed mine, and it was, I believe, I have to look up the exact dyno, but it was 18.2 or 18.6 horsepower at the rear wheel. That's not going to get you in trouble. Now, granted, so I think people are funny when they say this bike is underpowered, because I can, other than the interstate outside of town, I can literally speed anywhere in southern Arizona. The bike is speed limited at the ECU, meaning the brain of the bike, to an indicated 75 miles an hour. That comes down to really a real world, like GPS verified speed limit of about 72 miles an hour. And honestly, for anywhere I want to go other than, say, a long trip on Interstate 10, that's good enough. And in fact, I do, when I ride this bike to work, I do take the interstate sometimes, especially coming home, and I do just fine. There's so many slower vehicles moving through town and just outside of town that I don't feel like I'm going to get run over at 72 miles an hour, and it does just fine. Like, some people seem to think that riding it wide open throttle is going to hurt this bike, but it's built to last. You're not going to over rev this bike. So going back to it not being a super powerful bike, you're not really going to get into trouble with this bike. You know, unfortunately, we've seen around Tucson, we've seen a number of accidents and fatalities around motorcycles this year. Especially, it seems like there was, a couple of weeks ago, there was like one a day. And in a lot of the cases, yeah, it's the car driver's fault. But you also have this dynamic of a number of these cases were newer riders on quite powerful bikes, and they were going very fast in town. Like, at least two of the people were going well over the speed limit. Like, one guy was doing triple digits and couldn't make the turn, hit the guardrail. Another guy ended up hitting the median and flying into, I think he flew into like not a stop sign, but maybe a sign of some sort, and cracked his head open. You have people who are out there without motorcycle licenses getting killed too. My point is that often the mix of a new rider and a very powerful bike can be a bad mix. This bike isn't going to overwhelm you. All right, now, as you can see here, I have actually modified my saddle, but that brings us to number 2. Let me stand up here. So, the Royal Enfield Classic 350 actually has not a super low seat height, but it does have a relatively low seat height. The stock form, I think, is in the 30-inch range. You can actually get a low saddle that brings it down, I believe, below 30 inches. So this is a good bike for shorter riders. Now, I have put this sprung saddle on, so it does, I did kind of raise the seat height a little bit. Matter of fact, I ended up having to modify the brackets of the saddle to bring it back down. But if you are a shorter rider and a beginner, this is a good bike for you because you can actually get both feet planted on the ground. Now, there's a lot of people who say, including me, that it's not imperative that you can get both feet on the ground or You know, if you're tippy-toed, if you know what you're doing, that's okay. But for a beginner, just learning, if you ride around some of the streets like I do, where the street can be off camber, where you come to a stop sign, or, you know, an intersection, or there's gravel on the road, maybe you're having to stop on a hill, it is really nice for somebody who's maybe not gained that experienced rider confidence yet to be able to firmly plant both feet on the ground. This is a bike you're going to be able to do that with. Now, we've talked about shorter riders, but I think it's also important to talk about the fact that there's a number of tall riders that actually feel like this bike is still comfortable. In fact, shout out to Two-Wheeled Willie. He's 6'4", and I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I don't think he was perfectly comfortable on this bike, but he found it comfortable enough that he actually really loved this bike. He just kind of had to sit back a little bit onto a little portion of the passenger seat, but otherwise he found it pretty comfortable. So basically what I'm saying is, like, almost anybody from, say, maybe 5'2" to 6'4" is going to find this bike comfortable. It has a very neutral riding position. Now, I have modified my handlebars to make my bike a little bit more sporty. I lean forward a little bit more, but the standard bars leave you in a fairly neutral riding position. You can actually even get touring bars from Royal Enfield that are a little bit taller. Those allow you a very nice upright riding position. It's a very comfortable bike for even hours after hours. You know, there's a number of people I've watched that they didn't necessarily have a Royal Enfield dealer right next to them, or maybe they found, you know, a deal in the next state over. They've gone and purchased that new motorcycle, and they've rode it a state or two home. You know, wasn't a bike that they were, what am I trying to say? They were used to. You know, they just instantly found it comfortable. In fact, one of the other points I want to bring up is the fact that a lot of people's partners find it very comfortable with the pillion position. There's actually a video out there, I think it's done by MCN, I want to say, where they're talking about, you know, staff rides. And one of their staff members purchased this motorcycle because his girlfriend has some mobility issues, and this is an easy bike for her to get on and off of. As a matter of fact, like to tie into that, not to give too much personal information, but my wife in the last couple of years has had both of her hips replaced, and this weekend we had her jump on the back here. Well, she actually tried both positions, but jump on the back here, and she was able to get on and off okay, you know. It wasn't uncomfortable for her to get on the bike. And I think once we start doing some rides together, she'll find it fairly comfortable as we go on, you know, some little trips around southern Arizona. So that's number 2, low seat height and a very neutral riding position. Number 3, be careful there. Number 3 on our list is the fact that this bike has excellent handling. If you go over to the Fuzzy Bikers, I think it's for out motorcycles on YouTube here, if you go watch Fuzzy Bikers videos, he always does these little U-turn tests with pretty much everything he rides. And the Classic 350 is one of the bikes that consistently does, I don't know that I can say the best. I think maybe the Hunter might beat it out. I actually think my Interceptor almost matches it, but this bike has excellent handling. You can pull a U-turn almost in one lane of traffic, almost. You definitely can do it on a 2-lane road, pull a U-turn very easy without having to go off the road. Now, I do say when you're pulling U-turns on a motorcycle, exercise extra caution because you don't want to get accidentally blindsided where you didn't see somebody coming around a bend. But the handling on this motorcycle is just buttery smooth. It's stable enough that when I'm on the highway doing, an indicated 75 miles an hour, I don't feel like the bike is squirrely. But also when I'm at low speeds, I happen to live on a dirt road, so I'm constantly going around potholes. Its low handling speed characteristics are just as good as doing interstate speeds. I think my coffee's still working its way into my system. So I actually really appreciate the handling of the bike. Now, like I said, I did make mine a little bit more sporty by going to these M-bars and clip-ons. I do think I am gonna raise these clip-ons, as I don't necessarily like having to look down so far. This looks really cool, but I might raise these up a little bit so I don't have to look down quite as far to see behind me. Okay, so we've already hit cost a little bit, but my fourth reason why the Royal Enfield Classic 350 is a perfect first motorcycle is that it's very easy to customize and accessorize. There's a huge aftermarket support for this bike. And that's one of the things when I look at especially newer motorcycles or ones that have been out for 2 or 3 years, it's like, what kind of accessories does the manufacturer offer and what kind of accessories can I get from the aftermarket industry? And there's just so much you can do with this bike. I have, just with the little bit I've done with the seat, or the front and rear seats and the handlebars, grips, mirrors, and the saddlebags, I've had bikers ask me if this is an old vintage Triumph. It's very easy to get this bike looking how you want. You can turn this into a tracker. Some people do turn these into a bit of a vintage looking dual sport bike. Hope I'm not overreaching there, stretching. But like some people take these off-road, especially in India. So you can go that way if you want to. You can turn this thing into a bobber. There are kits out there for that. Like, take a look around. There are so many parts for this bike available. You can really turn this bike into your own masterpiece. And that's what I'm doing with this bike. So that's number 4 on the list. Huge aftermarket and OEM support for accessories and customization. Now, number 5, you could take this one or leave it. But I think that the lines of the Classic 350, going back to the 1950s and even into the 40s, being modeled after one of the earlier iterations of the Royal Enfield Bullet, I think the classic lines make this bike inexpensive to purchase, but it's something that you can be super proud of. The quality in this bike really goes well beyond the initial break-in cost of purchasing the motorcycle. Everything from the chrome to the paint to the engine quality and durability, they all tie together into a motorcycle you can really be proud of. Like the amount of comments I get on this motorcycle when I'm, parked at the gas station or, There was a father and son at an ice cream shop I stopped at in a town south of here. Between that, and people when I'm out making comments on the bike, they can't believe that this is a 2022. I don't know. It's the classic lines and everything about the bike really is a work of art to me. And I think that's something important when you're purchasing your first motorcycle. If you think back to when you were a kid, did you get any hand-me-downs as far as clothes from your cousins or your older brother, or when you wore that stuff to school, I felt self-conscious about it. This is a bike you don't have to feel self-conscious about riding, even though you didn't break the bank buying it. This is a motorcycle you can be really proud of, and that's going to carry into you wanting to learn how to work on it, maintain it, keep it clean. It's the opposite of my beater car. I do the absolute minimum to keep that car maintained and just get me back and forth to work and for our errands. This is opposite. When I see this really isn't bad, but I'm looking at this bike thinking, oh man, that's dirty. I need to clean that bike. I have a sense of pride in this bike, even though really the MSRP was only maybe a third of what my Indian Scout was, but I'm just as proud of riding this bike around as I am that bike. So the classic lines and the quality of what they've put in, made this bike, I think is something that the owner can take pride in, and we're not talking about, pride being a negative thing. This is something that can help drive you to maintain it and keep it clean so that this bike can last a lifetime. So there we go. That's my top 5 reasons why I think the Royal Enfield Classic 350 may not be the perfect bike for everybody for their first motorcycle, but I think it's a very, very, very good choice. Now, if you have purchased the Royal Enfield Classic 350 as your first motorcycle, or someone who has, leave a comment down below and tell me what that experience was like. And speaking of first motorcycles, I would like to encourage everybody, if you don't have your endorsement yet, or even if you do yourself a favor and get to one of the beginners courses that are out there. They're in every single state now. Go learn how to ride a motorcycle the way you ought to. I didn't have the opportunity when I first learned to ride a motorcycle, and I made all kinds of mistakes. That cost me replacing mirrors, dent in my motorcycle, things like that on my first bike. You don't want to do that to this beauty. I also want to thank all of the people who have taken the time to like and subscribe to my videos. I really appreciate it. If you haven't subscribed yet and you'd like this kind of content, look through my catalog. There's a little bit to offer to everybody. Please hit the subscribe button and the notification button to let you know when I upload a new video. For now, that's it from me. This is the Gila Monster Rides, and I want you to get out there and take a ride and be safe.